2:30 a.m. Columbia Records, Nashville. The studio lights hum like they're tired too. Johnny Cash stands at the microphone, eyes bloodshot after 3 days without sleep. His voice is raw, not broken. Raw like a nerve. Behind the glass, producer Don Law leans forward and says it casually, almost kindly. "Johnny, why can't you just sing clean? Like Frank Sinatra?" Silence. Not studio silence. The kind that presses on your chest. 5 seconds. Nobody breathes. Johnny slowly takes off his headphones, sets them down. Gently. He places the guitar against the wall and walks out of the booth. The musicians freeze. They recognize that look. They've seen it before. Right before he trashed a Memphis hotel room. Right before he threw a piano out of a 5th-floor window. Someone expects shouting. Someone expects fists. Someone expects chaos. Instead, Johnny stops in the doorway, turns back once, and says something so quiet, so controlled, that it will cost him millions and change American music forever. No one in that room understands it yet. Let us know where you're watching from, and we hope you enjoy the story. Cash didn't raise his voice. In the Columbia room, the air still smelled of warm tubes and cigarette ash, the kind that clung to curtains and polished wood. Don Law sat behind the console with the calm certainty of a man who'd heard every promise a singer could make. Someone had just joked, too neatly, about how Johnny ought to clean it up, sing smoother, be more presentable. Like Sinatra. Johnny kept his hands on the back of a chair, knuckles pale but steady. He looked at Don the way he looked at a judge. No pleading, no show. Then he said, quiet enough that it made the room lean in. "Tomorrow, 9 a.m., bring Sinatra to this studio. If he sings Folsom Prison Blues, better than I do, better like he means it, I'm done. I walk away from music for good." The talkback mic was still open. In the hallway, the band heard every word. The drummer, Fluke Holland, froze with a stick halfway to his knee. Nobody laughed. Don's face drained as if a light had been snapped off behind it. He knew the difference between a threat and a vow. This was the second. By morning, Johnny came early. Not staggering, not wired, not hunting for his guitar case. He walked in with nothing but a folded scrap tucked in his shirt pocket. Don expected a stunt. What Johnny set on the music stand wasn't a contract or a lyric sheet. It was a thin strip of toilet paper, creased until it was almost a cord, pencil words pressed hard enough to leave dents. "Read it," Johnny said. Don's eyes tracked the lines, slower with each sentence. A man in Folsom wrote that Cash's song was the only thing keeping him alive. When guards came heavy-handed, he sang it in his head to keep from breaking. The paper trembled, not in Don's hands, but in Johnny's, when he reached over and flattened the corner as if it might blow away. "Sinatra never got letters like that," Johnny said. "Not bitter, just factual. He sings about things he never had to live through." For a long moment, Don couldn't find his producer voice. He cleared his throat once, like an embarrassed kid. "Johnny, I was wrong." Johnny didn't soften. He didn't punish him either. He only nodded toward the door. "You want to hear what real sounds like? Come with me." They drove out past the clean streets, past the studios that pretended the world could be kept tidy. The sky was still dark when Johnny pulled up to his place. 4 a.m. A porch light made a small puddle of yellow on the steps. A man sat there, shoulders hunched inside a worn field jacket, hands wrapped around a paper cup like it was the last warm thing left. Johnny stepped out first. "Charlie," he said, as if this was an appointment, not charity. The man's eyes lifted, tired, careful, grateful, without asking for permission. His voice came in bursts, broken by long pauses, the way people talk when they're trying not to remember too much at once. Saigon. 3 friends. A night that never ended. Don Law stood on the driveway, silent. The studio, the charts, the talk about image. None of it fit on that porch. Johnny didn't announce himself as a good man. He just sat down beside Charlie and listened, letting the story take its time until even the crickets went quiet. The phone rang at 6 in the morning, sharp and impatient, like it already knew the answer wouldn't save anyone. Johnny reached for it without sitting up. 3 days had passed since the studio, since the porch, since Don Law's apology that hadn't landed where apologies usually did. "Columbia Records," the voice said, brisk and rehearsed. "This is to inform you that your contract is being terminated, effective immediately. Your recent conduct does not align with corporate standards." Johnny listened until the voice ran out of breath. There was no argument in him to offer back. When the line went dead, he stayed still, staring at the ceiling fan as it cut the air into slow, useless pieces. One sentence. One moment of honesty. Millions gone. By the time June arrived, the sun had crept just high enough to show the mess he'd made of his own kitchen. Not bottles this time, not pills. Paper. Lists. Names. A calculator clicking like a nervous insect. She expected to find him wrecked. Instead, he was counting. 47, he said when she stood behind him. "That's how many people don't get paid if I don't sign something else." He had written their names out by hand. Musicians, sound men, drivers. He'd taped small photographs beside some of them, wives holding babies, kids with crooked grins. June saw the tears before she heard his breath break. She'd known Johnny for years. This was the first time she'd seen him cry without hiding it behind anger. "They'll survive," she said gently. "Maybe," he answered. "But I don't get to pretend it's not my decision." He went back to Columbia with a proposal so simple it felt dangerous. He'd sign, he'd play, and 20% of everything he earned would go to families of inmates. Rent, groceries, school shoes. No press releases, just help. The reply came fast. Too fast. "That's not our brand." Johnny stood in the hallway with the receiver warm against his ear. Then he did the one thing no one expected him to do next. He thanked them for their time. And that afternoon, he told the truth out loud. He walked away. The backlash didn't roar at first. It gathered. Letters began to arrive at radio stations, written in uneven ink and careful cursive. "If you don't play cash, we won't listen." Then word came from inside the walls. 12 prisons, then more. Men refusing meals. Quiet, organized, stubborn. Not riots. Statements. Columbia panicked behind closed doors. Meetings stacked on meetings. One executive, Bob Johnston, stood up before anyone else could stop him. "I didn't get into this to sell soap," he said. "I want to work with a man." He handed in his resignation and walked out. Johnny found out last. He was sitting on the porch again, listening to June breathe beside him, when the call came asking him back. New terms. Different tone. He looked at the letter in his hand. Another one from Folsom, pencil pressed hard. Then he closed his eyes, long enough to decide who he was going to be when he opened them again. The letter from Folsom was thin and practical, the kind of paper that had learned not to expect answers. It arrived 2 weeks after the noise settled, after Columbia's calls slowed and the headlines moved on. The warden didn't dress it up. "Our inmates refused meals for you. If you have something to say, they'll listen." Johnny read it twice, then folded it once and slipped it into his pocket. This wasn't a booking. It was a debt. He drove to the prison without a guitar in the trunk. The guards noticed immediately. They always did. At the gate, one of them laughed under his breath. You know who these men are, right? Johnny nodded. Yeah, and you know who I am? The guard shrugged. A singer. 7 times arrested, Johnny said calmly. Public intoxication. Disorderly conduct. Same record. Different ink. Inside, the air changed. Concrete held the cold like a memory. Doors spoke in metal syllables. They put him in the dining hall with 30 men and no officers in the room. Protocol bent until it almost broke. Johnny sat down at the table like he'd been invited. No songs, no speeches, just questions, names, where you from, how long. The suspicion thinned slowly, like fog lifting when nobody's watching. One man stayed quiet. Late 30s, narrow face, eyes that had learned how to wait. When the room settled, he stood. I wrote something, he said, but nobody hears things like that in here. Johnny didn't hesitate. Sing it to me. The song wasn't polished. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It talked about gray walls and a chapel that didn't look like hope, but felt like it when you needed it most. The man's voice shook, then steadied. By the last line, Johnny was crying. No cover, no turning away. When it ended, the room stayed silent, not because it didn't know what to do, but because it did. What's your name? Johnny asked. Glenn Shirley. Johnny stood. That song's going on my record. The administration said no before he finished the sentence. A prison album wouldn't sell. No sponsor wanted it. Johnny put his own money on the table. If it failed, he'd fail with it. January 13th came fast. 1,000 inmates packed the room, noise ricocheting off the walls. Johnny stepped up to the microphone. Hello, I'm Johnny Cash. The reaction hit him like weather. He started, then stopped. Glenn was in the front row. I'm not singing my best song today, Johnny said. The man who wrote the truest one is. He handed Glenn the microphone. Hands went to weapons. A warden lifted his palm. Let him sing. Glenn's voice wavered, then found its spine. Johnny stood beside him, not above him. In that moment, the walls didn't move, but something else did. The album went to #1 before Johnny understood what that meant. By May, At Folsom Prison was everywhere. 3 million copies moving in 2 months. His voice pouring out of kitchens and trucks and storefront radios. He shook hands, smiled for photographs, accepted congratulations like they belonged to someone else. In his hotel room in Las Vegas, the curtains stayed closed. On the carpet, empty bottles, small white pills scattered like dice after a bad throw. He had rescued a career. He had lifted men who'd been buried alive by concrete and numbers. And alone at night, he couldn't lift himself. At 3 in the morning, he called June. Not to celebrate, to confess. His voice came thin, scraped raw by weeks of pretending he was fine. I don't deserve this, he said. They think I'm a hero. I'm not. I'm a liar with a habit. She drove through the dark without stopping, 800 kilometers of road unwinding under the headlights. She found him on the bathroom floor, back against the tub, sweat soaking his shirt. He didn't ask her to stay. He asked her to leave. You're better than this, he said. Better than me. June didn't sit beside him. She stood, opened the cabinet, and poured every pill into the toilet. Flushed. Once. Then again. She took his wallet and dropped it into the trash. The sound was final. Get up, she said. Now, or I walk out and don't come back. He shouted, cursed, begged. The words bounced off her like rain on tin. When he ran out of breath, she spoke again, quieter but harder. You saved 1,000 men. Now save yourself, or admit the rest was an act. That night, Johnny agreed to treatment. not a private retreat with silk robes and closed doors. He chose a small clinic in Madisonville, Tennessee. White walls, clean floors, farmers in the waiting room. "If I go somewhere fancy," he said, "I'll play a patient. Here, I'll just be a man." The doctor didn't soften it. 3 options. 6 months to live. A body that worked without him. Or withdrawal without medication. His liver couldn't take help. There would be pain. Hallucinations. Bones screaming from the inside. June offered to stay. Johnny shook his head. "Come back in a month," he said. "If I'm alive, I'll ask you to marry me. If I'm not, remember me how I was at Folsom." The worst night came in the 2nd week. He was strapped to the bed for his own safety, shouting at shadows, fighting hands that weren't there. At 2 a.m., the door opened. A man stepped in, hat twisting in his fingers. Glenn Shirley had been released early. He'd driven 500 kilometers to stand beside the man who once stood beside him. He read from a worn Bible until dawn. Johnny slept. For the first time in days, the room went quiet. Johnny left the clinic thinner than the man who had entered it. His clothes hung wrong, his face carried the pale calm of someone who'd survived something private and violent. February air cut clean across the parking lot. June stood by the door exactly where she'd said she would be, hands folded, not reaching for him until he took the last step on his own. "I still want to ask you," he said. His voice didn't shake, but it didn't pretend either. "Just not today. I need to prove this isn't a season." She studied him the way you study weather before planting. "How long?" "A year," he said. "If I'm still sober after a year, I'll ask you in front of everybody." She nodded once. That was the agreement. 11 months passed without fireworks, no relapses, no declarations. Johnny worked, toured carefully, went home early. The discipline wasn't loud, it was daily. Somewhere in that quiet, he planned something without telling a soul. January came. London, Ontario. A crowd of 5,000 pressed close, heat and noise building like a storm behind the curtain. June thought it was another night, another shared song. They sang Jackson, the old argument dressed as fun. Then Johnny raised a hand. The band stopped. The room fell into a silence so complete it felt staged. He dropped to one knee. "June," he said into the microphone, "a year ago I was dead. You didn't save me. You made me live. Will you marry me?" 10 seconds passed. They stretched until the lights hummed. June wiped her eyes and finally spoke. "Yes," she said, "with one condition." She turned to the audience, then back to him. "Every time you feel yourself slipping, you come to me, wherever I am. We don't fix it. We don't explain it. We sit. Together." Johnny couldn't answer. He nodded and whispered, too softly for the mic, "I'm scared I'll fail you." "Then we'll be scared together," she whispered back. They married a week later in a small church in Franklin, Kentucky. 30 people. Wood benches worn smooth by generations. Candle smoke and quiet hymns. Glenn Shirley stood as witness, hands folded, stunned by the request. During the vows, Johnny paused. "May I say something that isn't written?" The pastor stepped back. "People think you rescue me," Johnny said to June. "You don't. You rescue me from believing I'm unworthy of rescue." June slipped off her ring. "Then we're not trading jewelry," she said. "We're trading belief." She held it up again. "I believe in you." Afterward, a reporter asked if marriage meant Johnny would leave prisons behind. He shook his head, looking at June's hand in his. "No. Now I know what freedom looks like. And I want everyone to know they're allowed to want it." They never took a honeymoon. 6 months after the wedding, Johnny and June packed guitars instead of swimsuits and drove toward locked gates. Every show was free. No posters, no merchandise, just a promise being kept. Most wardens said yes quietly. One didn't. San Quentin's answer was firm. After Folsom, the inmates had started asking questions. Rights, dignity. The warden didn't want music stirring anything up again. Johnny didn't argue. He went over his head. The governor's office smelled of polish and order. Flags in the corners. Portraits watching from the walls. Johnny didn't sit until he was told. When he spoke, it wasn't careful. "You talk about law and order," he said. "But these men are Americans too. If my songs scare you, maybe you don't trust the system you're defending." The governor didn't approve the concert. Instead, he surprised everyone. "I'll allow it on one condition," he said. "I'll be there." Johnny nodded. "Then sit with the guards, not above them." On the day of the show, 1,500 inmates filled the hall. The governor sat stiff among uniforms, face unreadable. Johnny opened with Folsom Prison Blues, then stopped. His eyes fixed on a young man in the front row. Barely 20, all angles and nerves. "What's your name?" Johnny asked. "Merle Haggard." "How long they give you?" 15. Johnny let the math hang. "You'll be 35 when you walk out. Is that the end or the start?" Merle didn't answer. Johnny took off his guitar and held it out. "Come here." The room tightened. Fingers hovered near triggers. The governor leaned forward. Merle's hands shook as he took the instrument. He played something simple, unsure. Johnny sang with him, matching his breath. Not leading. Sharing. When it ended, Johnny turned to the room. "This man isn't a number. He's a musician who made a mistake." Then, looking straight at the governor, "Would you want your worst moment to be your life sentence?" No applause, no jeers, just a long, unsettled quiet. The next day, the call came. The governor didn't praise Johnny. He admitted something harder. "I saw guards cry," he said. "We're starting education programs, music, art. Not because of your songs, but because you made me see people." Months later, a letter arrived, pencil on prison paper. Merle wrote that he'd started writing songs, 23 already, that he didn't know if freedom would come, but belief had. Johnny read it to June. She smiled. "He's going to make it," she said. Johnny folded the letter carefully. "Maybe," he said, "but now he knows he's more than his mistake. That's enough to start." 33 years later, the room was white and quiet, in the way hospitals learn to be. Machines spoke softly beside the bed. Johnny Cash was 71, smaller now, his hands thin but deliberate. June had been gone 4 months. Since then, his heart worked like a man who'd lost the reason to argue with time. "Bring me my guitar," he said. The nurse hesitated, then nodded. As he waited, his mind slipped backward, not to stages or applause, but to a letter that had arrived in 1985. Glenn Shirley's handwriting had been careful, as if each word mattered more than the paper holding it. He was dying. Cancer. But he wanted Johnny to know something. After prison, he'd married. He'd raised a daughter. She taught music now. Children, guitars, songs passed forward. Johnny flew west that same day. He arrived 2 hours too late. At the funeral, Glenn's daughter, Sarah, pressed a cassette into his hand. "He recorded this for you," she said. Johnny listened alone in a parked car. Glenn's voice came weak but steady. 47 songs written behind bars. One man who'd listened. One man who'd said yes. Then the request, Go see the kids. The ones everyone's already given up on. Just once. In 1986, Johnny walked into a juvenile facility in Los Angeles with no cameras and no audience. 40 teenagers stared back with practiced hostility. He didn't sing. He told the truth. About stealing food. About drugs. About almost dying. When a boy named Marcus shouted that it was easy when you were famous, Johnny didn't argue. He explained hunger, sleeping in cars, shame. He sang one song. The room changed. Marcus stepped forward, voice breaking. His mother had died from an overdose. Everyone said he'd follow. Johnny looked at him and said, "Then let's make a deal. I believe in you. You try believing in yourself. One day at a time." They stood around him after. No autographs, just arms. Johnny stayed 4 hours. He listened. The tape of that day stayed private. Back in 2003, Johnny held that same cassette. His son sat nearby. "Find Marcus," Johnny said. "If he's alive, give him my guitar." Johnny died on September 12th. 2 weeks later, his son found Marcus in Los Angeles. 31. A social worker now. He cried when he saw the guitar. On his wall hung a letter from 1987. Johnny's handwriting. "You are not who they say you are. You are who you choose to be." Marcus showed him another wall. 127 letters. Kids he'd helped. Same opening line in each. "You believed in me?" Johnny Cash didn't leave behind perfection. He left belief. Passed hand to hand. Still moving.